On Christmas Eve, around 6:15 in the evening, the doorbell chimed. That sharp ring cut straight through the warm, low hum of conversation in our dining room like a cold blade. I was standing by the long table, adding the final touches. Porch. I neatly aligned the burgundy napkins I'd spent all morning ironing, doing my best to preserve the picture-perfect holiday atmosphere I'd built for our home in Greenwich, Connecticut. "Are you expecting someone else?" Richard asked from the head of the table. He barely glanced up from his iPad. Porch. At 71, my husband had perfected the art of looking like a busy Wall Street executive while doing absolutely nothing. His silvering hair was slicked back neat and tidy, just as it had been for the last 40 years, and the gold-rimmed reading glasses, perched on his nose, gave him a dignified look. At least, that's how he saw himself. Porch. "Not that I know of," I replied, wiping my hands on my apron. The aroma of bone-in ribeye roasted with rosemary and garlic drifted from the kitchen, blending with the crisp pine scent from the balsam fir in the corner. A tree arranged by professional decorators from Manhattan. Everything was supposed to be flawless. Lauren, my daughter-in-law, peered over her glass of Napa Valley Chardonnay. Porch. Her face carried that familiar, subtle look of condescension she had refined over her 5 years of marriage to my son, Carter. "It's probably just caroler volunteers asking for donations," she said, a sharp edge entering her tone whenever her comfort was disrupted. "Ignore them, Margaret. They'll give up and leave in a minute." Porch. At 34, Lauren had the kind of striking beauty that looked polished in photographs but felt distant up close. Her blonde hair was pinned back without a strand out of place, and her silk dress likely cost more than 2 months of my grocery budget. She'd spent half the evening checking her makeup in the reflection of the silver serving spoon. Porch. The doorbell rang again, longer and more insistent this time. "I'll get it," I said, heading toward the foyer. Carter, my 43-year-old son, was deep in conversation with his father about private equity real estate, a subject I couldn't follow and certainly couldn't afford. Neither of them seemed to register the interruption. Porch. When I opened the front door, the biting December wind swept in, carrying the fresh scent of falling snow. Standing on the porch was a young woman who couldn't have been older than 20. Long brown hair fell over her shoulders in damp waves from the cold air. She was visibly pregnant, maybe 7 or 8 months along, and shivering in a faded, thin winter coat that looked well-worn. Porch. "I'm so sorry to disturb you," she began, her voice soft but steady. "Could I please just have a cup of water? I've been walking for hours, and I'm really thirsty." Behind me, the harsh scrape of chair legs against the hardwood floor cut through the hallway. Richard's voice boomed out from the dining room, loud enough for the girl on the porch to hear clearly. "We are not a charity." Porch. "Tell them to move along. For heaven's sake, it's Christmas Eve. Point her toward the shelter in New Haven." Heat rushed to my face. Even after 45 years of marriage, Richard's casual coldness could still stun me. I looked closely at the young woman standing in front of me. She had deep brown, almost black eyes, and something in her gaze reminded me of myself at that age. Porch. It wasn't her features. It was her posture. Exhausted, freezing, and clearly in distress, she was still holding on to her dignity. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, stepping aside to clear the doorway. "Come inside. It's freezing out there." "Mom, what are you doing?" Carter appeared in the hallway, his brow furrowed. Porch. He had his father's tall frame, though thankfully his facial features were softer, taking after my side of the family. As a partner at a top accounting firm, he was successful and married to a woman with an impressive background. Yet he seemed entirely devoid of the empathy I'd tried so hard to teach him growing up. Lauren stepped up beside him, glass in hand. Porch. The moment her eyes fell on the girl, her expression twisted into pure disgust. "Have you lost your mind, Margaret? You don't know where she's been or what she's carrying. She's going to ruin dinner." Something inside me finally snapped. Maybe it was the way Lauren said it, treating this expectant mother like trash on the doorstep. Porch. Maybe it was Richard shouting dismissive orders from the other room. Or maybe it was the way the young woman's hands instinctively moved to protect her stomach the moment Lauren spoke. I brought my hand down hard on the mahogany console table in the foyer. The ceramic key bowl rattled sharply against the wood. Everyone froze. "Orch. Go set another place at the table," I said, my tone carrying an authority I hadn't used in years. "She is eating dinner with us tonight." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Lauren's mouth hung open, her composure completely gone. Carter looked as if the laws of physics had just ceased to apply. "Orch." From the dining room, I heard the scrape of Richard's chair again, followed by his heavy footsteps. "Margaret, have you completely lost your mind?" He barged into the small foyer, his face flushed red with irritation. "We planned a quiet, high-end family dinner, and you're bringing a stranger in off the street?" "She has a name," I interrupted, turning to the girl. "What is your name, dear?" "Orch." "Chloe," she said quietly, her voice remarkable for its calm. "Chloe Miller." "Chloe is joining us for Christmas dinner," I said, looking my husband straight in the eye. "If anyone has an issue with that, you're welcome to explain to me how shutting out an expectant mother on Christmas Eve aligns with the values you boast about at the country club." Orch. Richard's face shifted through several shades before settling on a deep crimson. "This is ridiculous, Margaret. We know nothing about her, where she came from, or what she wants." "I'd just like to sit down," Chloe said suddenly. Only then did I notice how pale she was. "Please, I haven't had anything to eat since yesterday morning." That settled the matter. "Orch." I gently took her elbow and guided her toward the dining room. "Carter, grab a chair from the kitchen. Lauren, get another place setting. Richard, get her a glass of water." Nobody moved. I paused and turned to face my family. "Orch." When a mother reaches her absolute limit, her voice carries a tone that cuts right through 43 years of Carter ignoring me, 5 years of Lauren's practiced detachment, and 4 decades of Richard assuming I would simply go along with whatever he wanted. Carter quietly headed into the kitchen. "Orch." Lauren set her wine glass on the counter with unnecessary force, then marched toward the china cabinet. Richard muttered something under his breath about misplaced sympathy, but he filled a glass with ice and water anyway. "Orch." I helped Chloe settle into the chair. Carter brought over, placing her right between my usual spot and the empty chair where my mother used to sit before she passed away 3 years ago. Chloe kept her thin coat on, and I noticed her hands were red and chapped from the cold. "How far along are you, dear?" I asked gently as I sat down. "Orch." 7 months, Chloe replied, taking the glass of water Richard handed her. She offered a quiet thank you, but Richard ignored her completely. Lauren returned with silver utensils and a china plate, setting them down with an intentional clatter. "So, where's the father?" she asked sharply, her tone dripping with judgment. "Orch. Off somewhere leaving you to wander around wealthy neighborhoods by yourself?" "Lauren," I warned, my tone sharp. "What?" "It's a fair question. People don't just show up out of nowhere on Christmas Eve without a story behind it." Chloe's grip tightened on her glass, but she didn't look away. She met Lauren's gaze head on. "He's no longer in my life." "Orch." "How convenient," Lauren muttered, taking a long sip of her Chardonnay. I began serving the food, placing sliced prime rib alongside roasted potatoes and buttered asparagus onto everyone's plates. The elaborate meal I had spent all day preparing suddenly felt like props in a play I'd never auditioned for. Orch. Every sound seemed magnified, the clinking of silverware, the rustle of Chloe's coat, and Lauren's deliberate heavy sighs. "So Chloe," I said, trying to break the tension, "where are you from originally?" "I grew up around here over in Stamford," she answered, cutting her beef into small, neat pieces. Stamford was only a short drive from Greenwich, but economically, it was a world away. "Orch. I've been staying with friends recently, but..." She paused, taking in the dining room. Things changed. Richard picked at his food without taking a single bite. Whenever he thought no one was looking, he glanced over at Chloe. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite name, It wasn't just curiosity. It was a look that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Orch. Friends, Lauren scoffed under her breath. Let me guess, they got tired of supporting you? That is enough, Lauren, I snapped. Chloe shook her head gently. It's fine, Mrs. She paused, looking at me inquiringly. Patterson. Margaret Patterson. This is my husband Richard, my son Carter, and his wife, Lauren. It's all right, Mrs. Patterson. Orch. People usually draw their own conclusions when they see someone in my situation. Chloe took a small bite of mashed potatoes and smiled for the first time since entering the house. This is wonderful, thank you. A wave of warmth softened my chest. It's my mother's recipe. She always said food made with care just tastes different. My mom used to say the exact same thing, Chloe said softly. Orch. Used to? I asked gently. She passed away 6 months ago. Cancer. The simple statement settled over the table, bringing the conversation to a complete halt. Even Lauren softened for a second, a flicker of awkwardness crossing her face. Carter cleared his throat and reached for his beer. I am so sorry, dear, I said, meaning every word. I know what it's like to lose a mother too soon. Orch. Feeling completely alone in the world without that anchor is terrible. Chloe nodded, blinking back tears. She would have loved a place like this, she said, looking around the room. The tree, the decorations, a family sitting down together for dinner. We never had much money, but she always did everything she could to make Christmas feel special. Orch. I glanced at the tree in the corner, decorated to perfection with coordinated gold and burgundy ribbon. Lauren had insisted on hiring professionals to handle it this year, claiming our old family tradition of decorating together was too cluttered and lacked style. Orch. Looking at it now, it struck me as cold and sterile, impressive to look at, but entirely empty of the memories that make the holidays matter. Well, you're here now, I reassured her. That's what counts. Richard suddenly put his fork down with unusual force. Margaret, step into the kitchen for a moment. I need to speak with you. His tone was less of a request and more of an order. Orch. I excused myself and followed him out. The moment the kitchen door swung shut, he began pacing back and forth between the island and the sink like a cornered animal. What on earth are you doing? He hissed, unable to mask his agitation. I'm showing basic human decency to someone who clearly needs a break. She's taking advantage of your kindness. Orch. Margaret, this is how people get taken advantage of, or worse. I stared at my husband, the man I'd shared a bed with for 45 years, and felt a cold pit form in my stomach. She is a pregnant 20-year-old girl who asked for a glass of water. What exactly do you think she's going to steal, Richard? The fine china? Orch. You've spent years complaining about how much I care about my mother's old things anyway. Richard didn't answer. He stood there staring through the doorway toward the dining room. A look on his face I couldn't read, but one that deeply unnerved me. His hand kept running nervously through his hair, his fingers noticeably trembling. This wasn't his usual annoyance over a disrupted plan. Orch. When we returned to the dining room, Chloe was politely listening to Carter boast about a recent golf tournament victory at the country club. Lauren was busy scrolling on her phone, likely posting photos of her dinner to social media. Chloe caught my eye and offered a genuine smile that reached all the way to her eyes. Thank you, she mouthed silently. I nodded and took my seat. Orch. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental in our home was shifting. Something far deeper than an unexpected visitor or an interrupted tradition. I watched Chloe eat. She was clearly starving, yet her manners were impeccably polite. I noticed how one of her hands rested instinctively over her stomach while she held her fork with the other. Orch. I found myself growing curious about her story, not out of malice like Lauren, but out of genuine wonder at how this young woman maintained such quiet grace under such difficult circumstances, and I couldn't stop watching Richard. I saw the way his eyes remained fixed on Chloe whenever he thought no one was looking, and I remembered how pale he had turned the moment she first stepped inside. Orch. Just then, Chloe reached for her glass of water, her sleeve riding up slightly. There, on her wrist, just below the frayed cuff of her worn sweater, was a mark on her skin. It was a birthmark, dark against her pale wrist, shaped distinctly like a crescent moon. It was the exact same birthmark my husband carried on his right shoulder. Torch. The rest of Christmas Eve dinner passed under a cloud of forced pleasantries and growing, oppressive tension. My mind kept racing back to that mark. I couldn't stop watching Richard, whose hand shook every time he reached for his glass. Torch. Chloe seemed largely unaware of the heavy air, eating her meal with quiet relief and answering Carter's questions about southern Connecticut using details only a local would know. "Oh, I know that area," Chloe said when Carter mentioned his old private high school in Greenwich. "When I was little, my mom used to clean houses and help out at dinner parties in that neighborhood. The houses were huge. I used to imagine what it would feel like to actually live in one." Something flickered across Richard's face. Guilt? Recognition? He cleared his throat and excused himself to the restroom. I noted that he was gone for nearly 10 minutes. When he returned, his face was flushed, and he refused to make eye contact with me. After dinner, I insisted Chloe stay for dessert. Lauren made her displeasure obvious with dramatic sighs and eye rolls, but I didn't care. There was something about this girl that pulled at every protective instinct I had. Maybe it was her clear vulnerability, or maybe it was the pure gratitude on her face when she tried the mashed potatoes, as if it were the finest meal she'd ever tasted. "I should probably head out," Chloe said as I began clearing the plates. "I don't want to intrude on your family any longer." "Nonsense," I said firmly. "It's Christmas Eve. No one should be out on the street alone tonight." Lauren let out a sharp laugh. "Some people prefer being on their own. Maybe that's how she ended up in this situation in the first place." The spite in her voice made my stomach turn. I'd always known Lauren was self-centered, but I had never seen her be so openly cruel. Chloe's face flushed red, but she kept her mouth shut. "Lauren," Carter warned quietly. "That's enough." "Enough?" Lauren turned her pent-up frustration on her husband. "Your mother invites a total stranger into our home, and I'm expected to pretend this is completely normal? We know nothing about her, Carter. She could be trouble." "She is a pregnant young woman who asked for water," I interjected. "Since when did basic human kindness become a threat?" Lauren laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Kindness? Margaret, you're being manipulated." She shows up with a sob story about a deceased mother and an absent father, and you instantly throw the door open. It's embarrassing." The word hung in the air like a slap. Chloe pushed her chair back and stood up, her face drained of color. "I really need to leave," she said, her voice far firmer this time. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Patterson. It was wonderful." "You are not going anywhere," I said, surprised by the sheer steel in my own voice. I turned to face Lauren, letting her see, for the first time in 5 years, exactly what I thought of her attitude. "This young woman is a guest in my home. If you cannot show her basic respect, the front door is right there. You are welcome to leave." A dead silence fell over the room. Lauren's mouth opened and closed. Carter looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Even Richard, who had been strangely quiet since returning from the hallway, stared at me in shock. "What did you just say?" Lauren's voice dropped to a cold whisper. "You heard me. I was trembling, not from fear, but from the sudden release of 45 years of pent-up anger at watching my family treat others like inconveniences. This is my house, and Chloe is my guest. If you have a problem with that, there's the door." For a second, I thought Lauren might actually walk out. Her face turned pale, her manicured fingers gripping her wineglass so tightly I thought the stem might snap. Instead, she stood up abruptly and marched into the living room, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Carter rushed after her, muttering hurried apologies. Though whether he was apologizing for me or to his wife, I couldn't tell. That left just Chloe, Richard, and me in the dining room, surrounded by the remnants of Christmas dinner and a suffocating quiet. "I am so sorry," Chloe whispered softly. I didn't mean to cause trouble between you and your family. You didn't cause anything, I assured her. Some people simply don't know how to respond to unexpected kindness. Orch. Richard made a low, indistinct sound that might have been agreement. But when I looked at him, he was staring at Chloe with an intensity that unsettled me deep down. It wasn't simple curiosity like Carter's. It was something far heavier, looking almost like dread. Chloe, he said suddenly, his voice raspy. Where did you say you grew up again? Orch. The question sounded ordinary enough, but something in his tone made both Chloe and me look at him closely. East side of Stamford, Chloe replied. Why do you ask? Richard's face went completely pale, a stark, ghostly white, as if the blood had been drained from his body. He gripped the edge of the dining table so hard his knuckles turned white. Orch, are you all right? I instinctively reached toward him. I'm fine, he blurted out, far too fast. Just tired. It's been a long day. He was anything but fine. The way he looked at Chloe was the way a person looks at a ghost. His breathing was rapid and shallow. Orch. I had seen Richard navigate business crises, family emergencies, and even the passing of my mother, and he had handled all of it with far more composure than he was showing right now. Stamford is a decent area, I said carefully, watching my husband's face. Lots of hard-working families over there. Chloe nodded. Orch. My mom always said she chose that neighborhood because she wanted me to grow up somewhere safe. She worked incredibly hard to keep us there. What did your mother do for work? Richard asked. His voice broke slightly on the word, mother, mostly residential cleaning. When things were tight, she worked catering for high-end dinner parties too. She never complained though. Orch. She always said she was building a foundation for my future. Every word seemed to hit Richard like a physical blow. Despite the warm temperature in the dining room, fine beads of sweat were forming on his forehead. What was her name? The question was barely above a whisper. Chloe offered her first genuine smile since Lauren's outburst. Elena. Elena Martinez before she met my dad. Orch. Later it was Elena Miller. But my father was never in the picture, so changing the name didn't end up meaning much. I watched my husband's composure shatter completely, like a structure collapsing in slow motion. His breathing turned ragged, and he pushed himself back from the table so abruptly that his chair tipped over and hit the floor with a loud thud. Orch. I need some air, he muttered incoherently, stumbling toward the glass doors that led out to the back patio. Chloe and I remained in our seats, stunned, listening to the heavy door slam shut behind him. Is he okay? Chloe asked, genuine concern in her voice. Should I call for help? I stared at the door he had just bolted through, my mind spinning out of control. Elena Martinez, Stamford. Orch. Catering dinner parties. Richard's bizarre behavior from the very moment Chloe stepped into our home. The crescent-shaped birthmark on her wrist. 20 years ago. The summer of 2002. That was the year Richard went through what he called a midlife crisis. Orch. He started working late, taking trips to other cities for supposed business seminars that had nothing to do with his firm, and taking off on weekends under the guise of playing golf out of state. I had suspected back then that there might be another woman, but I eventually convinced myself I was being paranoid. We had been married for 25 years at the time, and we had Carter to raise. Orch. I kept telling myself Richard was a committed family man. Mrs. Patterson? Chloe's voice sounded as if it were coming from far away. Are you all right? I looked at the young woman sitting at my table, the girl with dark eyes and the crescent mark on her wrist. Orch. A girl who held memories of a mother named Elena, who worked endlessly to give her a good life. A girl who grew up in Stamford, just a 20-minute drive from Greenwich, right where Richard used to drive off to so frequently 2 decades ago. Chloe. I began slowly, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. How old are you exactly? I turn 21 next March, she answered. Why? Orch. 21 next March. That meant she was born in March of 2003, which meant she was conceived in the summer of 2002. The exact summer Richard began taking those frequent weekend trips. The exact summer he started using late nights and mysterious meetings as excuses. Porch. The exact summer I began noticing charges on our credit card statements for restaurants and hotels I'd never been to. Charges he claimed were for entertaining clients. My hand shook so violently as I reached for my glass that the melted ice rattled against the glass. "Chloe," I said, not even sure I wanted to hear the answer to my next question. "Do you have any other family? Porch. Anyone else you can turn to?" She shook her head. "It was just me and my mom for as long as I can remember. She had a sister once, but they lost touch years ago. Mom rarely talked about family. She always said we had each other, and that was enough." Elena and Chloe. A mother and daughter who believed they were enough for each other. Porch. Elena cleaning executive homes while Chloe grew up, wondering what it would be like to live inside one. Meanwhile, Richard and I sat in our grand house, watching our son build his career, completely unaware that just a few miles away, a little girl was growing up with his stubborn jawline and his unique mark on her skin. Porch. From the living room, I could hear the muted, heated argument between Carter and Lauren. Through the back window, I could see Richard pacing the patio like a trapped animal, running his hands through his hair. A habit I knew all too well from every major crisis he'd ever faced. Chloe looked around our dining room, her expression complex. Porch. It wasn't envy or bitter resentment. It was something sadder, like a quiet longing. "You have a lovely home," she said softly. "Your family is very fortunate." Fortunate? I almost let out a laugh, but I held it back, worried that if I started, I wouldn't be able to stop. "Chloe," I said, making a decision that felt like stepping off the edge of a cliff, "would you like to stay the night?" Porch. "We have a guest room. It's late. It's snowing outside, and you shouldn't be wandering around on your own." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, I couldn't impose. Especially after." She gestured toward the living room, where Lauren's voice was rising again. "You are not imposing. It is an offer I am making freely." The truth was, I wasn't ready to let her walk out that door. Porch. Not before I figured out what was really happening. Not before I understood why my husband looked like he'd seen a ghost the second she stepped into our house. Chloe hesitated, her hand instinctively resting on her stomach. "Are you sure? I don't want to create more tension for you." "The only problem here," I said firmly, "is people who mistake kindness for weakness." Porch. Through the glass, I saw Richard leaning heavily against the patio railing, his shoulders shaking. Whether it was from the freezing cold or a total breakdown, I couldn't tell. But for the first time in 45 years of marriage, I realized I might not truly know the man I had built a life with. Porch. Looking at Chloe with Elena's eyes and Richard's mark, listening to her talk about growing up right where his mysterious drives used to end, a heavy realization settled over me. The truth was finally coming to light. I led Chloe upstairs to the guest room, my mind spinning with possibilities I had spent years trying not to think about. Porch. The room was small but comfortable, with a quilt my mother had sewn by hand draped over the double bed and a window looking out over the garden. I always kept it neat and ready, even though we rarely had visitors staying over. "The bathroom is right across the hall," I told her, setting fresh towels on the dresser. "There are extra blankets in the closet if you get chilly." Porch. Chloe sat on the edge of the mattress, running her fingers over the detailed stitching of the quilt. "This is beautiful work. Did you make it?" "My mother did. She made one for each of us when we got married. She said whenever life got hard, these quilts would keep us warm." She sounds like she was a wonderful person. Porch. She was. I lingered by the doorway, looking at Chloe's profile in the soft lamplight. "Chloe, may I ask you a personal question?" She looked up, her dark eyes clear and honest. "Of course. Your father, the man who was never in the picture, what was his name?" A fleeting shadow crossed her face, gone almost before I could register it. "My mom always told me his name was David. David Miller." Porch. "But..." She paused, shaking her head slightly. I never felt like she was telling me the whole truth about him. My throat felt dry. Why do you say that? Just little things? Whenever I asked about him, she changed the subject. She never had a single photo of him, never mentioned how they met. As I got older, I started thinking, Miller wasn't even his real last name. Orch. Maybe it was just easier to give me a random name than to explain things. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. Elena Martinez had given her daughter a fake name for a father, keeping his real identity hidden for 20 long years. And now that daughter was sitting in my guest room, carrying his grandchild, bearing the exact same mark on her skin. Orch. Chloe, I said, choosing my words carefully. That birthmark on your wrist, were you born with it? She looked down at her wrist, pulling her sweater sleeve up to reveal the crescent-shaped mark. Oh, this? Yes, I've had it my whole life. My mom used to call it my moon mark and told me it made me special. She let out a soft, bittersweet laugh. Orch. She made up all kinds of little stories like that. I think she just wanted to make sure I never felt self-conscious about it. It's not something to hide, I said softly. In fact, it's quite rare. That's what my mom used to say. She told me that maybe one day I'd meet someone else with the exact same mark, and it would mean something important. Chloe's voice trailed off into a quiet wish. Orch. When I was younger, I used to pretend that person would be my dad, and that we'd somehow recognize each other. The irony cut deeper than any blade. She had met the person with the exact same mark. He was downstairs on the back patio right now, likely on the edge of a full panic attack. Get some rest, dear, I managed to say, forcing my voice to stay steady. We can talk more in the morning. Orch. I closed the door gently and stood in the hallway for a long moment, trying to process everything that had just come to light. David Miller, obviously an alias. A daughter who grew up wishing she could meet her father, while he lived in a mansion 20 minutes away, building a comfortable life that completely excluded her. Downstairs, the house was unnaturally quiet. Orch. Carter and Lauren had taken their argument into the primary bedroom, though I could still hear faint, sharp whispers through the closed door. I walked down the stairs and headed into the kitchen, where I found Richard sitting at the breakfast island. His head was resting in his hands, a glass of whiskey sitting untouched in front of him. Richard, I said quietly. Orch. He looked up, and I was stunned by how much he seemed to have aged in the span of 2 hours. The man I had been married to for 45 years looked as though another 45 had collapsed on him in a single night. Is she staying? He asked, his voice raspy. Yes, in the guest room. I sat down across from him, folding my hands neatly on the counter. Margaret, we need to talk. Orch. Elena Martinez, I interrupted smoothly. Stamford. Summer of 2002. Richard's face crumbled completely. He reached for his glass with trembling hands, took a quick sip and set it back down with a heavy thud. How long have you known? I didn't know. Orch. I had my suspicions 20 years ago, but I talked myself out of them. I kept my voice steady. Even as everything inside me felt like it was breaking apart. I should have trusted my gut. You don't understand? So explain it to me, I said, my voice cutting through the air far sharper than I had anticipated. Orch. Explain to me how my husband carried on an affair with a woman named Elena Martinez back in the summer of 2002. Explain to me how 9 months later, that woman gave birth to a daughter who happens to carry the exact same birthmark as you. And explain to me how you have the nerve to sit here drinking whiskey when your own daughter is sleeping in our guest room upstairs. Orch. The word daughter hung between us like a detonation. Richard flinched as if I'd struck him across the face. It was never supposed to happen, he whispered desperately. What wasn't supposed to happen? The affair? The pregnancy? Or all of it? He looked up at me, his eyes consumed by raw guilt. God, Margaret, none of it was supposed to happen. Orch. I waited, giving him the space to give me the whole truth, all of it. I met Elena at a corporate function, he began, his voice strained. She was working for the high-end catering team. We got to talking during a break, and she wasn't like anyone else in my world. Orch. She was working 2 jobs to put herself through community college while taking care of her sick mother, and she never complained once. She was so driven, so full of life. So you decided to sleep with her. Richard squeezed his eyes shut. It didn't start like that. We just talked. I started looking forward to the events where I knew she'd be working. Then we started getting coffee. It was innocent at first. When did it stop being innocent? That summer. Her mother passed away in June, and she was completely broken. She had no one else, Margaret. No family, no support system. I just wanted to help her. So you helped her by stepping into her bed? By becoming her emotional lifeline? I asked, keeping my voice icy cold. At some point it became more than that, he said, his hands shaking. I don't know how to explain it. When I was with her, I felt like a different person. Someone better. Someone needed and valued. If I weren't so consumed by anger, the pain in his voice might have touched me. And what about us? What about Carter? Did we mean nothing to you? Of course you mattered. You mattered most. That's why I ended it. When? In August. The moment she told me she was pregnant. Richard's voice gave out entirely. She said she was keeping the baby, and I panicked. I told her I couldn't leave my family, that I couldn't be part of her life anymore. I stared at the man I had spent my life with, feeling a cold, impenetrable wall form inside my chest. You abandoned her. You threw money at her and pushed her away. I made sure she had financial help. You abandoned a pregnant woman who had just lost her mother and had no one else in the world. What was I supposed to do? Richard's voice rose in desperate panic. Leave you? Leave Carter? Destroy our family over a mistake I made? So you let Elena and Chloe pay the price for your mistake instead. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stared fixedly at his whiskey glass as if searching for answers he would never find. Did she ever try to reach to you? I finally asked. Did she ever ask for help? He shook his head. I warned her not to. I told her that if she came looking for me, I would deny everything. I said. I'd hire the best lawyers and make sure she couldn't prove a thing. His voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. I was terrified, Margaret. I was so afraid of you finding out. I was terrified of losing everything. So you sat back and let Elena struggle in poverty to raise your daughter all by herself, while you kept living comfortably, pretending she didn't exist. I sent money, he pleaded weakly. In the early years, I mailed anonymous cashier's checks. I wanted to help, but I couldn't risk. Risk what? Risk taking responsibility for your own actions? Tears welled in Richard's eyes as he looked up at me. Risk losing you. Those words might once have softened my heart. A reminder that, despite what he'd done, he had ultimately chosen our marriage and our home. Now, they only fueled my anger. Richard, you lost me the second you broke your vows. You lost me the moment you abandoned a pregnant woman. You just managed to hide it from me for 20 years. Margaret, please. Does she know? I cut him off. Does Chloe know who you are? I don't think so. Elena never told her my real name. She probably doesn't even know I live in Greenwich. I remembered Chloe talking with quiet hope about meeting someone with her birthmark one day, someone who would recognize her as his daughter. All evening, she had sat less than 3 feet from him, completely unaware. Show me, I ordered suddenly. What? Your birthmark. Show me. Confused, Richard unbuttoned his sleeve and pulled back his collar, revealing the crescent-shaped mark on his shoulder. The exact same size, the exact same shape, the exact same dark pigmentation against pale skin. My God, I whispered. She really is your daughter. Yes, he admitted, the word barely more than a sigh. I stared at the mark he had kept hidden beneath his clothes for all these years, unmistakable proof that the young woman sleeping in our guest room was his daughter and our son's half-sister. What are we going to do? Richard asked. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't have an immediate answer. What do you do when the daughter your husband kept secret for 20 years shows up on your doorstep on Christmas Eve, pregnant and completely alone? What do you do when you realize the man you've been married to for 45 years abandoned his own flesh and blood? I don't know, I answered truthfully. But I know what we are not doing. What? We are not lying to her anymore. George. We are not letting her leave this house without knowing the truth. Margaret, you can't tell her. That will ruin everything. Everything was already ruined, Richard. You ruined it 20 years ago when you decided your comfort was worth more than doing the right thing. I stood up, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of this reality. George. That girl upstairs spent her whole life wondering about her father, wondering if he ever thought about her, if he ever regretted leaving. She has a right to know. What about Carter? Have you thought about how this affects him? Finding out he has a sister he never knew existed? Carter is a grown man. He'll have to face this just like the rest of us. And Lauren? George, you think someone like her is going to accept this? I recalled Lauren's sharp comments at dinner, her utter contempt for anyone she deemed beneath her. Lauren can accept it or she can leave. I genuinely do not care anymore. Richard stared at me, stunned. You can't be serious. George. I am entirely serious. I looked down at my husband, this man who had carried such a devastating secret for 2 decades, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. For 20 years, you let me believe I knew who you were. You let me build my life on a lie. So yes, I mean every single word. George. I left him sitting at the kitchen table with his whiskey and his guilt, and walked up the stairs to the primary bedroom alone. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, overlooking the backyard, watching the moon filter through the bare oak branches, thinking about the young woman sleeping across the hall. Chloe Miller. George. A girl who spent her life imagining a father who lived 20 minutes away in luxury. A girl who lost her mother 6 months ago and was now facing the prospect of parenthood completely alone. A girl who walked up to our door on a freezing Christmas Eve, just asking for a glass of water, only to be thrown into the center of a family crisis she didn't even understand. George. In the morning, I would have to tell her the truth. In the morning, I would have to look into her face as she realized the man who refused her a glass of water was her father. In the morning, I would have to help her figure out what to do with a reality that was about to shatter her world. George. For tonight, I sat by the window and quietly mourned. For the family I thought I had, for the marriage I believed was unshakable, and for the long trail of lies that had brought us to this moment. Outside, the snow finally began to fall over Connecticut. George. A thick white blanket covered the manicured lawn, but by morning that pure layer would melt away. Just like everything else I had once believed was permanent. On Christmas morning, I was woken by the muffled sound of weeping. For a moment, through the haze of exhaustion and the dim light filtering through the window, I caught myself wondering if it was a baby crying. George. But reality flooded back, and I realized the heartbreaking sound was coming from the guest room across the hall. It was Chloe. I slipped on my robe, walked quietly down the hallway, and gave 2 light knocks on her door. Chloe, dear, are you all right? The crying stopped instantly. I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson. Just missing my mom a little extra today. George. I opened the door to find her sitting on the edge of the bed. She hadn't changed into pajamas. She was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday. Tears had streaked her face, and dark circles under her eyes showed she hadn't slept at all. Oh, sweetheart. Instinctively, I walked over and sat beside her, gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. George. The first holiday without her is always the hardest. She loved Christmas so much. Chloe choked out, her voice trembling. She'd start playing carols in November and plan out how to decorate our small apartment. We never had much money, but she always found a way to make it feel special. I thought of the immaculate, designer-arranged tree downstairs. George. It was stunning, but completely hollow, carrying none of the love Chloe was describing. She sounds like a wonderful mother. She was everything to me. I don't know how I'm supposed to do this without her. Chloe placed a hand over her rounded belly. I don't know how to be a mother without mine. The weight of it hit me hard. George. The young woman sitting in front of me was Richard's daughter, grieving the loss of the only parent she had ever known, while her biological father was resting safely down the hall. Elena Martinez had become everything to her child because she had no choice. Because Richard had walked away from them both. Orch. Chloe, I began gently, keeping my tone soft. There's something I need to tell you about last night. About how my husband reacted when you arrived. She looked up, her dark eyes. The very eyes Richard had confessed looked so much like Elena's, searching mine in confusion. Is he okay? He looked so shaken last night. How do you tell a person that her whole life was shaped by a lie? Orch. How do you explain that the father she wondered about had been living comfortably just 20 minutes away while she struggled in poverty? Richard recognized you, I said slowly. Not your face, but your mother's name. Chloe, there's something you need to know about your father. About David Miller? Chloe tensed instantly. What do you mean? David Miller wasn't his real name. Orch. Your mother gave you that name to protect you. Protect me from what? I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would alter her life forever. To protect you from a painful truth. Your father was a married man. A man who walked away the moment he learned your mother was pregnant. The color drained from Chloe's face. How do you know that? Because your father is my husband, Richard. Orch. An absolute heavy silence filled the room. It was so quiet I could hear the old house settling in the cold, and the faint sounds from the kitchen below. Likely Richard making coffee, trying to pretend this was just another normal Christmas morning. That's not possible, Chloe finally whispered, her voice barely audible. Orch. I wish it weren't, I said, reaching out to take her hand, but she pulled back instinctively. Chloe, I know this is a shock. I know it's... You're lying. She stood up abruptly, backing away toward the window. Is this some kind of sick joke? Why would you say that? Because it's the truth. Your mother's name was Elena Martinez. She worked for a catering company. Orch. In the summer of 2002, she met my husband at a function in Greenwich. When she told him she was pregnant, he gave her money to leave and warned her never to contact him again. Chloe's breathing became shallow and fast. She backed all the way up against the window frame, one hand covering her stomach. No! No! My mom would have told me! She would never hide something like that from me. Orch. She was trying to protect you, just like she protected you by giving you a fake name for your father. Prove it! Chloe's voice cracked with anger and panic. If you're telling the truth, prove it! I thought of the birthmark, of Richard's erratic behavior, of every detail that had clicked into place the moment she stepped through our door. The mark on your wrist. Orch. Richard has the exact same birthmark on his right shoulder. Same shape, same size. Chloe looked down at her wrist as if seeing the crescent mark for the very first time. Lots of people have birthmarks, not a matching crescent shape, and not with all the other details that fit perfectly. I stood up slowly, being careful not to crowd her. Chloe, I know this is overwhelming. Orch. I know it's the last thing you wanted to hear, but I couldn't let you leave here without knowing the truth. The truth? Chloe's voice broke. She sounded exhausted, far beyond her 20 years. The truth is my mother worked herself into the ground to raise me. She cleaned houses, worked night shifts in hospital laundries, and never complained once. Not ever. Orch. The truth is she told me my father was a good man who just couldn't be in our lives because of circumstances. Every word felt like a physical blow. Elena Martinez had protected Richard even after he abandoned her. She let her daughter believe her father was a decent man caught in a tough situation, rather than the coward he really was. Orch. She lied to protect him, Chloe said, tears spilling over her pale cheeks. She spent 20 years protecting a man who threw us away like trash. She lied to protect you, I corrected her gently, so you wouldn't have to carry the pain of knowing your father chose to walk away. Well, now I know anyway, don't I? Bitterness and a cold sharpness filled her voice. Orch. Now I know that while my mother worked 2 jobs and skipped meals so I could eat, my father was living in a mansion with his real family, pretending we didn't exist. The agony in her voice was almost unbearable. I wanted to comfort her, to soften the blow of this terrible reality, but facing a betrayal like this made any comforting words feel completely hollow. Chloe? Torch. Does he know I'm here? She cut in. Does he know who I am? Yes, he's known since last night. She let out a short, broken laugh. And he still can't bring himself to face me. Even now, knowing who I am, he can't own up to it. He's afraid. I don't care if he's afraid. Chloe's voice rose, carrying through the house. Torch. I heard rapid footsteps on the stairs below. Richard and likely Carter, heading up toward the commotion. I've been afraid my whole life. Afraid we'd get evicted, afraid my mom would get sick and I'd be alone. Afraid I'd end up just like her, working myself to death for wealthy people who didn't even see me. But I never had the choice to just opt out of being afraid. And he did. Torch. Heavy footsteps sounded right outside the room, signaling that this confrontation was about to get much worse. Carter appeared at the door first, his hair messy from sleep, wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants. Mom, what's going on? We heard shouting. Richard stepped up right behind him, fully dressed despite the early hour. His face was a sickly, pale gray from sheer exhaustion and dread. Torch. When his eyes met Chloe's, she froze completely. So, Chloe said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. You're my father. Carter looked back and forth between Chloe and our parents, thoroughly confused. What is happening here? Your father, I said, looking directly at Richard, had an affair 20 years ago. This young woman is your half-sister. Torch. The statement landed in the small room like a dropped weight. Carter's mouth fell open. Richard held onto the doorframe as if he would collapse without it. That's impossible, Carter stammered. Dad wouldn't. Show her, I commanded Richard. Show her the birthmark. Richard, show her. Torch. With trembling hands, Richard unbuttoned his collar and pulled down his shirt, revealing the crescent mark on his shoulder. Chloe stared at it, then looked down at her own wrist, comparing the two identical marks. My God, Carter breathed. My God, it's true. Chloe's remaining composure shattered entirely. She sank back onto the bed, breaking into deep, ragged sobs that shook her entire body. Torch. 20 years, she choked out between tears. 20 years my mother struggled alone while you lived comfortably in this house with your real family. Chloe, please. Richard stepped into the room, but Chloe recoiled so fiercely that he stopped dead in his tracks. Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me. I can explain. Explain what? Chloe looked up, her eyes blazing with fury. Torch. Explain how you abandoned a pregnant woman? Explain how you let your own daughter grow up in poverty while you lived in luxury 20 minutes away? She wiped her tears away roughly with her sleeve, showing a fierce determination that reminded me strikingly of myself at a younger age. Did you ever think about us once in 20 years? Did you ever even care if we were alive? Torch. Richard's silence was the most damning answer of all. My mother died 6 months ago, Chloe continued, her voice growing stronger with every word. Cancer. We couldn't afford proper care at a private facility. We couldn't even afford for her to take time off work. She died in a public ward, and right up until the end, she was asking me to forgive her for not giving me a better life. Torch. I sent money, Richard finally blurted out. When you were little, anonymously? A few times, Chloe's gaze turned razor sharp. We never saw a single cent of it, not one penny. My mother worked herself into the ground trying to keep us afloat. She stood tall, looking Richard right in the eye with immense courage. Do you know what she said to me before she passed? Torch. She said she was sorry she couldn't give me a father. She believed every child deserved both parents, and she thought it was her personal failure that she couldn't give me a complete family. Tears streamed down Richard's pale face. Alina was always... Don't you say her name? Chloe's voice, cut like broken glass. You don't get to speak her name. You gave up that right the day you walked away. Torch. Footsteps hurried up the stairs, followed by Lauren's impatient voice. What is all the screaming about up here? Can anyone get some sleep around here? Do people have no basic courtesy? Here comes the rest of it, Carter muttered, looking like he might throw up. Lauren stepped into the room wearing an expensive silk robe, her blonde hair effortlessly arranged, despite having just woken up. Torch. seeing us all crammed into the small space. Chloe crying, Richard on the verge of collapse, Carter and me standing pale and rigid, her annoyance turned to immediate suspicion. What is going on? Chloe is Carter's half-sister, I told her plainly. Richard is her biological father. For a few seconds, Lauren just stared, as if trying to process a foreign language. Orch. Then she laughed, a sharp, cold, dismissive laugh. Are you joking? Is this some kind of sick holiday prank? I wish it were, I said coldly. Lauren's laughter cut off instantly. She looked at Chloe with a sharp, calculating gaze, taking in the birthmark and the unmistakable resemblance to Richard, now that the truth was out. Orch. Well, she said, her voice turning icy cold, that certainly explains a lot about last night. Lauren? Carter tried to intervene. So what is this? Is she here for money? Looking for an inheritance? Lauren looked around the room, her tone dripping with disdain. Because legally speaking, I should point out that illegitimate children don't automatically have rights to. Orch. Get out, Chloe said quietly. Excuse me? I said, get out. Chloe stood her ground. Even 7 months pregnant, and half Lauren's size, the quiet intensity radiating from her, forced my usually confident daughter-in-law to take a step back. I don't want your money. I don't want anything from any of you. I just want you out of my sight. Lauren's face flushed red. Orch, how dare you speak to me like that in my own house? This isn't your house, I interrupted sharply. It's mine, and if anyone is leaving today, it will be you. Lauren glared at me with pure venom. Fine. But don't expect me to sit around for this family drama. Carter, I married you, not your father's secret scandal. The harshness of her words hung in the air. Orch. Chloe flinched slightly, but kept her head held high. You're right, she said with a dignity that put us all to shame. My parents weren't married, and my father walked away. But everything I have, I earned myself. At least I understand loyalty, sacrifice, and real love. Things someone like you will clearly never grasp. Lauren opened her mouth to snap back, but Carter stepped between them. Orch, enough. Both of you, stop. He looked around at his family. A father who had lied for 20 years, a mother who had just uncovered a deep betrayal, a pregnant half-sister who had suddenly appeared on their doorstep, and a wife treating a human tragedy like a social inconvenience. I need some air, Carter said, turning and walking out of the room without another word. Orch. Lauren shot us one last bitter look, her silk robe swishing behind her as she hurried after him down the hall. Once again, only Chloe, Richard, and I remained in the guest room. The space felt far too small to hold all the pain, anger, and secrets that had finally come to light. I'm leaving, Chloe said softly, reaching for her thin coat. No, I said firmly. You can't just walk out like this. Orch. Why? She looked at me with eyes that held far too much sorrow for her age. So your family can figure out how to manage this inconvenience? So your husband can explain why he threw his own daughter away? So we can figure out how to make this right, I said. Chloe offered a sad, painful smile. You can't make this right, Mrs. Patterson. You can't bring my mother back. Orch. You can't give me back 20 years of growing up in poverty, wondering why my father didn't want me. Some damage can never be undone. She was right, and we all knew it. Some betrayals run too deep for apologies or kind gestures to ever fix. Orch. Yet, as I watched her pack her few belongings, preparing to walk out of our lives just as abruptly as she had entered, I knew that letting her go like this would be the ultimate failure, the final mistake in a long line of them. Chloe, I called out as she reached the door. You don't have to forgive us. You don't have to be part of this family. Orch. But please don't walk away thinking that what happened to you and your mother was acceptable. Please don't ever believe that you don't matter. She paused at the doorway without turning around. The problem isn't that. I think I don't matter, Mrs. Patterson. The problem is that for 20 years, none of you thought I did either. Orch. With that, she walked out, leaving behind only the subtle scent of inexpensive shampoo and the heavy weight of an inescapable truth. I found Chloe sitting on the front porch steps. She had wrapped her thin coat tightly around her shoulders, a frail barrier against the freezing December cold. She had stopped crying, Her face settled into a quiet, hollow calm. Porch. The buses don't run on Christmas Day, I said, walking over to sit beside her on the cold concrete. I'll walk. You're 7 months pregnant, Chloe. You can't walk across town in this weather. She didn't answer, just stared out at the quiet street lined with large houses and neat lawns. Porch. I wondered what she was seeing. The life she might have had if her father had made different choices, or a neighborhood she felt she would never belong to. Behind us, raised voices drifted from inside the house. Carter and Lauren were arguing heatedly in the kitchen, their angry tones echoing through the walls. Porch. Richard had likely retreated to his study, just as he always did whenever faced with something he couldn't fix. I meant what I said, Chloe murmured softly. I don't want anything from your family. I just want to disappear and pretend this never happened. Is that what your mother would have wanted for you? Chloe's defensive posture softened slightly. My mother just wanted me to be happy. Porch. She'd want me to build a good life for my baby, not get dragged into someone else's mess. And what do you want? She was quiet for a long time. So long I thought she might not answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want my mom back. I want to stop feeling so alone. Porch. I want my baby to have a family that actually looks forward to them and loves them. She let out a bitter, quiet laugh. But we don't always get what we want, do we? The front door opened behind us, and Carter stepped out onto the porch. He had quickly pulled on jeans and a sweater, his hair still untamed. He looked at Chloe, as if trying to make sense of a complex puzzle. Porch. Can we talk? He asked hesitantly. Chloe glanced at me, then looked back at Carter. I suppose so. Carter sat down on the step below us and turned to face her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Two siblings who shared a father, yet had lived entirely different lives. I'm sorry, Carter said finally, for everything my father did to you and your mother. Porch. For everything my family represents. Your family didn't do this, Chloe replied, her tone tired rather than harsh. Your father did. There's a difference. Is there? We all benefited from his choice to walk away. Every comfort I had growing up, every opportunity, every advantage, it all came at your expense. Porch. I watched my son process this harsh reality, coming to terms with the fact that his privileged life had been built on his father's betrayal of another family. It was painful to watch, but it was a realization he needed to face. You didn't know, Chloe said quietly. That doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't. But it isn't your fault either. Porch. They sat in silence for a moment. A brother and sister who should have grown up together, sharing memories and supporting one another, now sitting like strangers trying to find common ground amidst the ruins. What is she like? Chloe asked suddenly. Your wife. Carter let out a heavy sigh. Lauren is complicated. She wasn't always like this. Porch. When we first met in college, she was different. Kinder. She cared about things other than social standing and country clubs. What changed her? Money, I think, and status. The longer we stayed in those social circles, the more those things seemed to matter to her. Carter looked down at his hands. I should have seen it sooner. I should have recognized who she was becoming. Porch. The door behind us was yanked open with tremendous force, the impact vibrating through the entire porch structure. Lauren stood in the doorway, fully suited up in designer winter wear. Her Max Mara coat alone likely cost more than Chloe made in an entire year. I cannot believe you are all sitting out here playing happy family. She spat, her words dripping with pure disdain. Porch. Carter, get the keys. We are leaving right now. We aren't going anywhere, Carter said from his spot on the concrete steps, staying completely still. Excuse me? I said we aren't leaving. This is my family, Lauren. All of them, including Chloe. Lauren's face drained of color before flushing deep red. That woman is not your family. Porch. She's a stranger who showed up on our doorstep yesterday with a sob story. She is my sister, Carter said, standing up slowly to face her. If you can't accept that, then maybe you're the one who needs to leave. Lauren stared at him with eyes full of poison. Fine. But don't expect me to be waiting around when you come back to your senses and crawl back to me. Porch. She spun around and marched back inside. Within minutes, the sound of drawers slamming and items being violently crammed into suitcases echoed from upstairs. Every loud impact made Carter flinch, but he didn't move a single inch to stop her. "Are you sure about this?" Chloe asked him softly. "I don't want to be the reason your marriage falls apart." Porch. "You aren't the reason," Carter replied, his voice calm. "You're just the catalyst. This fracture was already there for years. I was just too much of a coward to face it." 20 minutes later, Lauren emerged dragging 2 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases, her face tight with rage and wounded pride. Porch. She stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at Carter with a final lingering expectation in her gaze. "Last chance," she stated. "Choose your real family, or choose her." Carter stood tall. I held my breath, wondering if he would fold under the pressure the way his father had 20 years ago. Instead, he walked down the steps and leaned in, placing a brief, quiet kiss on Lauren's cheek. "Porch. Take care of yourself, Lauren," he said gently. Lauren glared at him in utter disbelief, then turned her fury toward Chloe. "I hope you're happy. You managed to destroy a 5-year marriage." "I didn't destroy anything," Chloe answered evenly. "I just exposed what was already broken." Porch. Lauren's Mercedes G-Wagon roared to life with an unnecessary surge of the engine as she peeled out of the driveway like someone fleeing a crime scene. We watched in silence till her taillights disappeared around the corner. "Well," Carter said, settling back onto the steps. "That's that. I'm so sorry," Chloe said again. "Don't apologize. I should have stood up to her years ago." Porch. "If I had, maybe she wouldn't have turned into someone capable of showing such cruelty to a person in need." The front door opened again, much more quietly this time. Richard stepped out. In just a few hours, he looked as if he had aged another decade. His skin gray, his expression hollowed out. "Chloe," he began, his voice raspy with emotion. "Please, just let me explain." Porch. "There's nothing to explain," Chloe said, without even turning her head to look at him. "You made your choice 20 years ago. I'm making mine now. I see that now. I was terrified and selfish, and I made the worst decision of my entire life." "The worst decision of your life was the best thing that ever happened to me." Chloe fired back fiercely. "Porch. Because it meant I was raised by Elena Martinez. She was worth 10 of you. She taught me what real love is, what sacrifice means, and how to put the people you care about above your own comfort." Richard flinched as if struck. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. You're right, you don't. Porch. And I am certainly not going to hand it over just to make you feel better about the choices you made." "Then what do I do? How do I fix this?" Chloe stood up slowly, placing a hand behind her lower back to support her weight. "You don't. Some things can't be fixed, Mr. Patterson. Some wounds never close." She began walking down the steps. I reached out and gently took her arm. "Chloe, wait." Porch. "I can't do this, Mrs. Patterson. I can't sit here and listen to him make excuses for abandoning my mother. I have to go." "Where will you go?" "I don't know. I'll figure it out. I always do." At that exact moment, something deep inside me gave way entirely. Porch. Looking at this brave young woman carrying my husband's grandchild, someone who would rather face the prospect of homelessness than accept a handout from a family that had failed her, I saw the exact same pattern playing out again. The Patterson men running from their responsibilities while the women paid the price. "No," I said, standing up firmly. "You aren't going anywhere." Porch. Chloe looked at me in surprise. "What?" I turned to face Richard. For the first time in 45 years of marriage, I let him see the cold, absolute resolve behind my eyes. "Get out," I told him, looking him straight in the face. "Margaret." I said, "Get out. Go pack your things and leave." "You can't be serious. This is my house too." Porch. "Actually, it isn't." I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened my banking app, and held the screen up for him to see. "For the past 3 years, I've been paying the mortgage on this house because you poured our joint savings into failed investment schemes that never returned a dime. On top of that, this property is held solely in my name, purchased using the trust my mother left me. Porch. The prenuptial agreement is crystal clear. So when I tell you to get out, I mean every word. Richard stared at me as if looking at a complete stranger. Perhaps I was. Perhaps the traditional wife who quietly absorbed his failures and maintained appearances had vanished the moment Chloe walked through our door. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care. Porch. Find an apartment, check into a hotel, stay with your golf buddies. Just get out of my sight. Margaret, please, we can work through this. We've been married for 45 years. 45 years built on a lie. I will not spend another single day pretending to love a man who could turn his back on his own child. Porch. Carter looked at me with a sense of quiet awe, while Chloe stood completely stunned. Even I felt surprised by the sheer steel in my own voice. You have 1 hour, I continued. Gather what you need and go. We will handle the rest through lawyers. Richard opened his mouth to argue, but the finality in my expression cut him off. Porch. He turned around and dragged himself back into the house, his shoulders slumping in complete defeat. Chloe sat back down on the step. You didn't have to do that for me. I didn't expect you to give up your husband on my account. I'm not giving him up for you, I said, sitting beside her and taking her cold hand in mine. I'm choosing right over wrong. Porch. I'm choosing the family I want to build, rather than the broken one I've been trying to hold together. What does that mean? I took a deep breath, knowing my next words would alter both of our lives forever. It means I am asking you to stay. Not as a guest, and not as a poor relative we're helping out of guilt. Stay as family, as my daughter. If you'll have me. Porch. Tears instantly welled in Chloe's eyes. You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you are brave, kind, and strong. I know that every day you honor your mother's memory, and I know my grandchild is exceptionally lucky to have you as a mother. Your grandchild. The baby you are carrying is my grandchild, whether Richard acknowledges it or not. Porch. And I promise you, I will never let another Patterson run away from their responsibilities again. Chloe began to cry, but the tears were different this time. They weren't born of pain or anger, but of something far deeper. They looked like hope. I don't know how to be part of a family, she whispered through her sobs. It's been just me and my mom for so long. Porch. Then we'll learn together, I said, squeezing her hand tightly. We'll figure it out as we go. Through the front window, we could see Richard moving back and forth in the upstairs bedroom, packing 45 years of marriage into a few bags. In the kitchen, Carter was pouring coffee, still trying to process how his world had completely shifted in less than 24 hours. Porch. Standing on that front porch in the cold December air, something new was taking root. It wasn't the family any of us had envisioned, but it was a family we chose, a family we actually deserved. Chloe, I said gently, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. Welcome home. 6 months later, I woke up to a sound I had waited a lifetime to hear. A baby crying from the nursery across the hall. Porch. It wasn't a cry of pain or distress, but the energetic demand of a healthy newborn announcing his thoughts to the world. I pulled on my robe and walked quietly toward the room that had once been Richard's study. It had since been transformed into a bright nursery with soft yellow walls, decorated with hand-painted animals that Chloe and I had finished together during her final trimester. Porch. Early morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. Chloe was already up, skillfully lifting little Gabriel from his crib. Her movements were smooth and confident, showing none of the hesitation of someone who had only been a mother for 3 weeks. She looked entirely natural in the role. Porch. Hearing me at the door, she looked up with a radiant smile, one I had never seen during those dark early days. Good morning, Grandma, she said softly. Hearing that title still brought a swell of warmth to my chest. Someone was eager for breakfast. I stepped into the room, admiring how perfectly Gabriel fit in her arms. Though only 21, Chloe handled motherhood with quiet grace. Porch. Elena had raised her well, passing down the strength and resilience needed to step into this role with confidence. Only now she didn't have to do it alone. He has your eyes, I said, gently touching Gabriel's tiny hand as he nursed with total focus. Has his grandfather's stubborn streak too. Chloe laughed gently. Look at how tightly he grips my finger. Torch. Once he sets his mind on something, he doesn't let go. We had learned to speak of Richard with a neutral calm. For Gabriel's sake, there was no longer bitterness or anger, just an acceptance of the past, like discussing a distant relative who was no longer part of our daily lives. The truth was, I rarely thought about Richard anymore. Torch. I knew where he was. Living in a small one-bedroom apartment downtown, working part-time at an insurance agency after his grand investment schemes failed to materialize. Carter met him for coffee occasionally, keeping their interactions brief and polite. Torch. But the man I had spent 45 years with felt like someone from a completely different lifetime. Someone I had once known but never truly understood. Carter left early to meet with the lawyers. Chloe mentioned from the rocking chair we had picked up at an estate sale and restored together. He said not to worry, he'll call later with an update. Torch. Carter had been handling the divorce proceedings with meticulous care. Thanks to his accounting background, the process moved along smoothly. We divided our assets fairly. Richard kept his personal belongings, his golf clubs, and his half of our liquid savings, while I retained the house, the family heirlooms, and the life I was building alongside Chloe and Gabriel. Torch. It hadn't been dramatic or bitter. After 45 years, we simply went our separate ways, like two travelers realizing they were walking entirely different paths. Did you sleep well last night? I asked, sitting on the window seat where I had spent so many mornings watching over Chloe during her pregnancy. Better than expected. Torch. Gabriel only woke up twice and went right back to sleep after feeding. Chloe looked down at her son with a look of quiet wonder. I keep thinking how much my mom would have loved this, the late-night feedings, the little sighs he makes when he's full. She used to say babies were proof that magic still exists in the world. I no longer felt sadness when Chloe spoke of Elena. Torch. Instead, I felt immense gratitude. Gratitude for the remarkable woman who had raised such a strong daughter, passing down the grace that made Chloe the wonderful mother she was today. Elena's legacy lived on through Chloe, and now through Gabriel. She's part of him, you know, I said softly. All the love she gave you, all the strength she passed down. Gabriel inherits all of it. Torch. Chloe nodded, tears glistening in her eyes without falling. Over the past few months, she had grown into her own, gaining a deep sense of security within our small family. The frightened, pregnant girl who had knocked on our door on Christmas Eve had transformed into a self-assured woman who knew her worth. The doorbell rang downstairs. I checked the clock. 7:30 a.m. Too early for a typical visitor. Torch. I'll get it, I said, kissing Gabriel's soft forehead before heading downstairs. Peering through the glass, I saw Richard standing on the porch. He looked considerably older and slighter than he had 6 months ago. He held a small, wrapped box in his hands, nervously shifting his weight from foot to foot. I opened the door, but stayed firmly in the doorway. Richard. Margaret. Torch. I know it's early, but I brought something for the baby. He offered the box, his hands noticeably trembling. Whether from nerves or something else, I didn't ask. You could have called first. Would you have answered if I did? Probably not. I accepted the box without opening it. What do you need, Richard? I want to see my grandson. I want to apologize to Chloe. Torch. I want to try to make things right. What makes you think any of us are looking for that? He stood silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting past me toward the home we had shared for decades. Because I'm sick, Margaret. The words landed heavily, though I kept my expression composed. What is it? Lung cancer. Advanced stage 3. The doctors say I have about 6 months, maybe less. Torch. I held onto the doorframe, letting the news settle. Even after everything that had happened, my initial impulse was still a quiet sorrow for a man I had known for so long. 45 years of shared history didn't simply vanish overnight. I'm sorry to hear that, I said honestly. Porch. I don't want to leave without ever seeing my grandson or telling Chloe how deeply I regret what I did to her and her mother. Chloe doesn't owe you reconciliation just because you're facing a diagnosis. I know that. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm just asking for 5 minutes. 5 minutes to tell her face to face that walking away from her was the biggest failure of my life. Porch. I looked at the man standing before me, the man who had given me Carter, who had shared decades of my life, yet had also turned his back on his own daughter and left another woman to struggle alone. He looked tired, diminished, and deeply aware of his own mortality. Wait here, I said. I found Chloe in the kitchen, warming a bottle while Gabriel rested peacefully in his bassinet on the counter. Porch. She looked up as I entered, immediately sensing the shift in my posture. What's wrong? Richard is outside. He wants to see Gabriel and he wants to speak with you. Chloe went still. Does he know about? She gestured toward the bassinet. He knows he has a grandson. And Chloe, there's something else. He's ill. Advanced cancer. He says he doesn't have much time left. Porch. I watched a mix of emotions cross Chloe's face. Disbelief, lingering pain, and a quiet, subdued understanding. She remained silent for a long moment, processing the news. What do you think I should do? She finally asked. I think you should do whatever feels right to you, whatever choice brings you peace. Chloe looked down at Gabriel. Porch. This little boy would grow up surrounded by certainty, love, and support. He would never have to wonder where he belonged. She gently touched his tiny hand and his fingers closed reflexively around hers. 5 minutes, she said quietly. In the living room. With you there. I nodded and returned to the front door, where Richard was still standing, looking both hopeful and deeply anxious. Porch. 5 minutes, I told him. In the living room. I'll be there the entire time. Thank you. I led him into the living room. The same room where we had gathered for Christmas Eve dinner 6 months ago, where everything had changed. Chloe was already seated on the sofa, holding Gabriel, her expression carefully composed. Porch. Richard stopped near the entryway, staring at his daughter and grandson, as if trying to commit the sight to memory. The resemblance between them was striking. The same steady jawline, the same clear, dark eyes, the same quiet resolve. Chloe, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for agreeing to see me. She didn't offer a response, simply waiting for him to speak. Porch. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I know nothing I say can undo the past. But I need you to know that walking away from you was the single biggest mistake of my life. Chloe's expression remained unchanged. Why tell me this now? Because you're sick? No, I knew it was wrong from the beginning. I was too weak to admit it, too selfish to face the consequences. Porch. And now, Richard's voice strained with emotion. Now time has run out. I just need to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you were growing up. Sorry my choices forced your mother to work so hard, and sorry you ever had to feel unwanted. The truth is, I thought about you every day. If you thought about me every day, why didn't you ever try to find us? Porch. Because I was afraid of being rejected. I was afraid of what it would do to my marriage and my relationship with Carter. I was selfish, and I convinced myself you were better off without me. Chloe looked at him in silence, studying the man who was her father by blood, but had never been one in practice. Gabriel stirred in her arms, letting out a soft, sleepy sound. Porch. You were right about one thing, Chloe said evenly. We were better off without you. Richard looked down, closing his eyes. Alina Martinez was the best parent any child could ask for. She gave me everything I needed: love, stability, values, and strength. She taught me how to work hard, how to be kind, and how to stand on my own 2 feet. Porch. Pain crossed Richard's face, but Chloe wasn't finished. Do you know the difference between you and her? Chloe's voice was firm and steady. When she was facing the end of her life, she spent her final days making sure I knew how deeply loved I was, and how proud she was of the person I had become. She used her remaining strength to build me up, not to seek comfort for herself. Porch. Chloe stood up, cradling Gabriel against her shoulder. You walked away from me once because you couldn't face the consequences of your choices. But I am not going to let you walk in and out of my son's life whenever it suits you." Richard looked up, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "Torch. I mean that if you want to be part of Gabriel's life, you have to prove you can put his needs ahead of your own. That means showing up consistently. Not just when it's convenient or when you want to ease your conscience." A small, hesitant ray of hope appeared in Richard's expression. You're willing to let me be in his life?" "Torch. I am willing to give you the chance to earn that place," Chloe said, her tone absolute. "But if you let him down even once, you're out. No second chances, no excuses. Gabriel deserves better than that." "I understand." "Are you sure about that?" Chloe asked, fixing him with an intense gaze. "Because being a grandfather isn't just about showing up when it's fun and easy. Torch. It's about being there when things get tough. It means putting Gabriel's needs far above your own comfort, your own fears, and your own self-centered desires." Richard nodded repeatedly, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I want to try. I truly want to do better than I did before." Torch. Chloe looked over at me, and in her eyes I saw Elena's formidable strength, and in her set jawline I saw Elena's quiet wisdom. "We'll see," Chloe said softly. She stepped toward Richard, stopping just close enough for him to get a clear look at Gabriel's face. "This is your grandson. His name is Gabriel James Martinez Patterson. He is 3 weeks old. Torch. He loves being held, and he's already the smartest little boy in the world." Richard looked down at Gabriel, his eyes filled with a painful mixture of wonder, heartbreak, and overwhelming love. "He's perfect." "Yes, he is," Chloe affirmed. "And as he grows up, he is going to know beyond a shadow of a doubt how deeply he is loved and wanted." "I will make sure of that. May I?" "Torch. May I hold him?" Richard asked, his voice trembling. Chloe hesitated for a brief second, then carefully passed Gabriel into her father's arms. Richard held the infant as if he were holding something impossibly fragile and priceless. Tears fell uncontrolled onto Gabriel's soft blanket. "Hello, Gabriel," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your grandfather. Torch. I promise you, I will do so much better by you than I did by your mother." We stayed in that quiet space for a few moments, 3 generations of a family that had once been fractured, now slowly learning how to heal. It was far from perfect. It certainly wasn't the reunion any of us would have envisioned months ago. But it was honest and real. Torch. And that was worth infinitely more than the hollow illusions we used to carry around. When Gabriel began to squirm and grow restless, Chloe gently took him back into her arms. "He's getting hungry again. Growing boys need constant refueling." Richard nodded, clearly reluctant to let the moment end. "Thank you for letting me see him. Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve." Torch. "You don't deserve it," Chloe stated matter-of-factly. "But Gabriel does. Every child deserves to know where they come from, even when their family story is complicated and messy." After Richard took his leave, Chloe and I sat together in the kitchen while Gabriel settled back into a peaceful sleep in his bassinet. Torch. The early morning sun poured through the large windows, illuminating the hand-painted nursery wall art Chloe had created, the grocery list written in both our hands on the fridge, and the new framed family photos on the wall. Pictures of Gabriel and Chloe hanging right alongside older photos of Carter and me. Torch. "Do you think I did the right thing?" Chloe asked, stirring a spoonful of honey into her tea. "I think you did an exceptionally brave thing," I replied, lifting my coffee cup. "Doing the brave thing and doing the right thing aren't always identical, but usually they're pretty close." "I was terrified," she admitted quietly. "Scared that he might end up hurting Gabriel the way he hurt me." Torch. "If he ever tries, we will protect Gabriel the exact same way Elena protected you," I said firmly, meeting her eyes. "But Chloe, you have something Elena didn't have back then." "What's that?" "A family that will always have your back. Carter is going to be the absolute best uncle to this little boy. Torch. I'm going to be the grandmother who spoils him rotten, bakes him cookies, and tells him all about the fierce, remarkable women in his family tree. And you are going to be a mother who loves him enough to set firm boundaries and demand only the best for him." Chloe smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand tightly. "I never thought I'd get to have this," she whispered. "A real family. Porch. A place where I truly belong. You belong right here, both you and Gabriel. This will always be your home for as long as you want it. Even when Gabriel is bigger, running around the house, making noise and breaking things. Especially then. This house was far too quiet for far too long. Porch. It needs children's laughter, messy family dinners, wrapping paper torn all over the floor, birthday parties, and noisy Christmas mornings." Through the window, I watched Mrs. Chen hanging laundry in her yard, humming quietly to herself. In the distance, the church bells chimed 9 o'clock, marking another hour of what felt like the very first day of the rest of our lives. Porch. Gabriel stirred in his bassinet, letting out a cute little coo that signaled he was waking up, ready for his next adventure. Chloe finished the last of her tea, stood up, and smoothed down her son's blanket. "All right, little man," she said softly, her tone full of warmth. "Let's go seize what the world has for us today." Porch. As I watched Chloe carry my grandson upstairs, listening to her talk to him in that tender, soothing voice that reminded me so much of Elena, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. It was complete and total contentment. The family I thought I had for 45 years was built on secrets, silence, and the convenient lie that some people's needs mattered more than others. Porch. But this family, this small circle of people bound together by past pain, but choosing each other every single day through love and respect. This was real. This was home. And Gabriel James Martinez Patterson, sound asleep upstairs with his brave young mother watching over him, would grow up knowing exactly where he belonged. He belonged right here with us,